Egypt is in an economic crisis made more severe by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The conflict, now in its second year, has increased food and energy prices. High inflation, the low exchange value of Egyptian money, and unpopular government policies all add to Egypt's problems. The crisis has pushed many Egyptians out of the middle class. The country's poor, about one-third of the population, are cutting back on basic goods. Now, many are asking how long they can survive like this. The Egyptian government recently unveiled a draft state ownership policy document which specifies the areas of government it will privatize and those that it will continue in partnership with in terms of the private sector, and others which it will increase its investments in over the next 3 years in order to confront its stifling economic crisis. It also announced it will list 10 of the largest state-owned and military companies on the stock exchange by the end of this year, and many other assets will be sold over the next 3 years leading to the year 2025, worth $40 billion in order to attract foreign investors as well as alleviate the current economic situation. Now, to further help us understand what is happening to Egypt's economy, now joining me from Nairobi, Kenya is Aly Khan Satchu, Africa Geo-economist and macro analyst. Is also the CEO of Rich Management. Thank you so much, Aly Khan, for joining us on this particular edition of the show.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.
All right, so we talk about high inflation, depreciation in currency value. We talk about the standard of living that is actually skyrocketing in Egypt, and the government policies that Egyptian government has put out that some people say is a bit misplaced. How bad is it for Egypt and its economy, and what are the factors responsible for this misnomerly?
So it's been a perfect storm for Egypt. You've had the war in Ukraine, which sent wheat prices skyrocketing. We've seen some retracement of those prices. Egypt is one of the world's biggest importers of wheat. It subsidized the price of bread for its consumers. So you had that really tip it over the edge, and you could put this is one of the situations when you can say that the Ukraine war was responsible for pushing Egypt over the edge. You saw a very sharp currency devaluation. This was as foreign investors in particular took their money off the table, and Egyptian banks themselves were heavily leveraged with the government bond market, the local currency government bond market. On average, Egyptian banks hold 600% of their capital in government securities. There was no buffer left to safeguard the currency. There was no ability to pick up where the foreign investors had sold off. So the currency has gone down. The values of securities have gone down. And interest rates have gone considerably higher. So very complicated poly-crisis, really, for Egypt. The negotiation with the IMF hasn't been as quick as they might have hoped. Bear in mind, Egypt is one of the IMF's longest standing and most frequent customers. We also saw allies in the GCC who, like the UAE and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, delay their support whilst they waited for the IMF program to be thrashed out. That wasn't helpful. So it's really a combination of things that have gone wrong here. But the question is, do they have the wherewithal to deal with the problem? Are we near the worst, and can we bounce from here? And what I'll just say to start off with is, look, Egypt's policymakers, its mandarins are probably the cleverest or the second cleverest on the continent. Their ability to react to a situation is much better than, in my experience, we have in other countries. So we've seen the currency adjust, something that Nigeria has failed to do, that Kenya is failing to do. So they're adjusting that. And at some point, everything will become very, very cheap and investors will pile in again. And recently, we've seen data to support that view. So overall, look, I think they have the bench strength to deal with the problem. It is a very big problem, but it's a problem no different to which other countries are facing, particularly in the frontier. But overall, I think they've got a plan, and the plan will work.
You're giving kudos to Egyptian policymakers, but then a bit of departure from what other economists are saying, looking at this particular economic reform that the Egyptian government brought on board, which started from the year 2016 and scaled down to this year. Of course, that particular policy was sought to be some sort of exchange in terms of the bailouts that Egypt is hoping to get from the IMF. But these economists are saying that it is the bane of the difficulties that the Egyptian economy is facing as of now, because when you talk about the new tax cuts and large cuts in subsidies for basic goods, these economists are saying that the Egyptian government did not actually get it right in these areas, maybe in the form of the kind of policies that were made or the form of implementation. So where do we place it in terms of the policies that the Egyptian government brought on board that started from 2016 up to this year?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. So there have been some very big flagship infrastructure projects, some of which I don't think have produced yet a return on the investment. And there has been a lot of capex spending which has been going on. And really, given the context of what we've now witnessed since for the last 12 months, since the Fed started raising rates, it's put more pressure on emerging and frontier countries. Those projects have put pressure on the budget. I think also from a society point of view, the Egyptian government subsidizes the price of bread and subsidizes a couple of other things. It has been very difficult for the Egyptian government to address that subsidy issue because it could cause unrest. It's supporting the people at the bottom of the pyramid, and it's a very expensive subsidy. So, I think criticism about the government not lifting subsidies fast enough is kind of unfair. You've got to also bear in mind the political reality. And, it would really make the government insecure if they move too quickly. So, yes, overspent, but that's what most African countries did in the last 10 years. And they're all paying a price from Ghana to wherever you care to mention. So I'm not saying Egypt is any different. They made some good investments. What they did in the Suez Canal, for example, I think will pay off multiple times. That's a solid investment in my view. But overall, I think, they've got to make some changes. You're going to see that they're going to be offloading a lot of their parastatals. And I think one criticism I would make, I think the army has too big a position in the private sector, and that needs to be trimmed down and trimmed down fast, because the army, as an investor, is like an oil tanker. It does not adjust fast enough, and I think that's also partly one of the reasons why the economy has been suffering. The adjustment just has not happened quickly enough.
But then looking at the reports, Aly Khan, Egypt's military was said to have actually done well in terms of supporting the economy, talking about assisting in infrastructure development and the distribution of subsidized products, of course, in a situation where we have acute shortage of dollars. So are you saying that what the Egyptian military has done so far in the couple of years to help the Egyptian economy stabilize, so to speak, has not really yielded any fruits? Or you're saying there should be a whittle down in the influence that the Egyptian military has on the economy?
So I'm saying just structurally, there needs to be a whittling down of the influence that the Egyptian military has in the economy. It's way too big. Its job is to defend the country, not to be in business. And I think, this is an opportunity for significant reform around the military. And I for one would be, advising President Sisi to do exactly that. Obviously, he is a military man. He's going to be reluctant to do that. But I think it's very important at this point in time that they look at the position of the military within the wider context of the Egyptian economy. And I think it's high time they did something about that. Look, distributing food and that kind of thing is optics and it's public relations. It's not the serious business of what they need to be doing. They need to be getting out of business. They need to be allowing those companies to float and let people in the private sector take up the baton at this time. They seem to have, the government seems to have quite a bold privatization program. I think, if they embrace that, it's going to work very, very effectively because this is a big economy. It's more than 100 million people. It's got a lot of potential. Tourism, for example, there are whole parts of this economy that have tremendous amount of potential. So I think, look, it's very, very tough. But out of all the African countries that I can see, they're the one making the tough decisions. Others have got their head in the sand and they're not really making these reforms. It's hard, but they're going to make those reforms. It starts with just a few things. They've got a freely traded currency largely. It's fallen because they've let it fall and find its correct level. That of itself is a shock absorber that many other countries just fail to understand and appreciate. And that at some point it will come to a price which is so attractive that everyone's going to pile in. And frankly, I think that moment has actually arrived for them.
All right. Well, we cannot exonerate the Central Bank of Egypt out of this entire issue. There's acute shortage of the dollars. There's cash crunch. Even the value of the currency is set to be terrible, as it were now. Now, the Central Bank of Egypt actually rolled out some policies. One of them was the restriction on imports. But according to reports, it actually drove up inflation in the country as a result of that. But then let's look at it on a holistic level. What do you make of the role that the CBE's policies have had on the country's fortunes, most especially the economic fortunes of late?
That's an interesting question. Okay, so I mean, they had a very tough situation to deal with. And, as I said, they're a huge importer of food. In order to keep the machine going, you've got to import tons of food when the price of wheat, for example, had nearly doubled at some point last year. So this put extraordinary pressure on the central bank, on foreign exchange reserves. They responded by trying to reduce imports. And what that, as you said, it created an inflationary spiral because people started to buy. It created a lot of domestic demand for things. I noticed, for example, car prices surged in Egypt. Because people thought, if I don't buy it now, when the FX rate drops, I'm going to be paying much, much more. So it kind of created its own feedback loop. And unfortunately, from an inflationary point of view, was negative. And I think the central bank kind of was a little bit slow off the draw. They took their time. They kind of sort of said, look, everything's going to be all right, when clearly everyone else could see it wasn't. They could see the flight money running out the door. And I think if I'm going to criticize the central bank, I'm going to say that they were in denial for a bit. But, we've got central banks on our continent that have been in denial for a decade. So let's face facts. So I think overall, what I would say, tough times, but there is potential in this economy. I think if they truly embrace a Thatcher-style privatization revolution, and the IMF comes through, which it will, and then you get the GCC piling in, which they will as well. This is probably the bottom for Egyptian prices all across the board.
All right, let's talk about the privatization revolution that you just mentioned. Now, the Egyptian government is now hoping to put up state assets for sales to investors who are willing to take up these firms and probably bring some sort of transformation to it. And it is estimated about $40 billion. Some people are saying it's modest, but I'd like to ask you, would you say that the value is underpriced or overpriced?
So the first thing, if you're embarking on a privatization program, and this is a logic people don't simply understand, is you don't squeeze the last penny out of the value. You sell at a discount, you give people a profit, so that the pipeline continues to flow. If people are taking losses, they're not coming back. So you want people, both your local investors to be making a profit and international investors to make a profit. A lot of countries and policymakers in Africa simply don't understand that. And the failure to understand that is why so many privatization programs fail. If you're going to stuff investors with losses or you're going to sell things too expensive, they're not coming back. They're just trying to work out how to get out. So let's get real about that. So I think when people poo-poo the amount, 40 billion, they're being conservative. They're probably selling assets which will be worth 60, 65 billion for 40 billion. You make a bit of money, you get used to investing in Egypt, you come back for more. So I think 40 billion is a modest number. I think they can raise a lot more. But this is existing businesses that they're coming to the market for. There is a huge FDI story behind Egypt as well. The gas fines that they've had are going to drive investment into that sector in Egypt. So I think when I look at it in total, 40 billion might look modest in the scheme of things, but it's a pipeline that they're opening up, which will keep flowing. So it's going to be a repeat type situation. You got FDI coming in, you got the IMF going to come in, you're going to have the UAE, which interestingly is a very strong supporter of Sisi. They're going to come in. And I think on balance, you will see this economy turn around much quicker than other African economies where policymakers are not making the moves that Egypt has sought to make.
All right, so talking about moves being made, you have actually expressed optimism as regards the IMF bailout fund coming to Egypt, and of course the accruals that can come from the privatization of the state assets. But then looking at the critical sectors of the Egyptian economy, which areas would you say that the government needs to plug these investments when they do come in to bring about some sort of transformation to the country's economy?
So I think, look, it's 100 million people economy. There are lots of opportunities. I think the government should focus on infrastructure like the Suez Canal, should focus on the prospects of the gas finds that they already had, and then look to put money into places where there is an easy win. With the Egyptian pound at the current level, tourism is a no-brainer. So I'd be really looking at tourism because that has a multiplier effect. I would be looking at the whole agricultural production, where, by the way, they've done a lot of things. And actually, I think people are going to be surprised, notwithstanding the topography of Egypt. It's interesting, most of the agriculture just follows the Nile, the rest of it's desert. But they've done a lot of reforms. And I think you're going to see significantly better food production in Egypt going forward. That's somewhere else where I think they should be looking to make more investments in. That would reduce the import bill that's currently crippling the economy.
All right. In all of these discussions, Aly Khan, there is the Gulf Arab allies on the fringes that sometime back they actually pledged investments worth billions of dollars into the Egyptian economy. So should Egypt still hope for that? Because we don't know if that pledge or if those pledges have been redeemed, and we don't know what kind of transformation that can also bring to the country. Do you think that is something that we can also plug into?
Absolutely. I think, the UAE, for example, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia can turn this thing around in a blink of an eye. They got the funds to be transformative. They did promise a lot of money beforehand, but it hasn't come through as the IMF really took the lead. And the IMF was working with the government on the reform program. And I think these folks, the Gulf allies, will come in once the IMF says to them, look, we're happy with this reform program. Then I think you get a triple whammy. You get the IMF, you get Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, you get UAE, and then you can stabilize the situation very, very quickly. And I think that will happen very soon. I expect, the IMF has a bandwidth problem right now because practically everybody's knocking at their door. But I think the IMF will come through for Egypt in the next few weeks, latest in a few months. And then you get the money coming in from the UAE and from Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, etc.
All right, so finally, Aly Khan, even as we draw to a close on the discussion, now President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has called for a national dialogue and has called on the stakeholders to come together and discuss on ways out of this current crisis. What do you think should form the fulcrum of the discussions? Because what we're looking at is how Egypt can get out of the economic woods that it is currently in.
So, one of the problems that Egypt faces is it's a very authoritarian system. It's you got al-Sisi at the top, and there is a sense that, the government administers. There isn't much conversation going on between the government and the citizens. So, firstly, this is a good effort to deal with that problem in that regard. So I think that's one positive step forward. I think, the government's got to be open to whatever suggestions the private sector. These are the people at the coalface of the economy. They know what needs to be done. And these are the sort of people you need to be listening to. So I think the conversation is a good place to start with. And then I think they've got to look at things of how they're going to reduce the subsidies, how are they going to motivate their entrepreneurial class, how are they going to excite investors to come back into their T-bill market, which was such a strong pillar of support for three and a half years? So good to have the conversation, and I think the government should be listening, and I expect them to be.
All right, well, it's quite challenging for Egypt right now, a former shining light in the northern African sphere of the continent. But then we'll hope that there's some sort of change can come their way, just as you've mentioned, and they can bring about some critical decision-making process into what needs to be done to revive its economy. Thank you so much, Aly Khan, for joining this conversation.
All right. Thank you.